Welcome to this deep dive. We're looking into the whole evolving conversation around UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
That's right.
And if you're tuning in, it's probably because you want to get a handle on this pretty complex topic,
Yeah.
quickly and thoroughly,
Yeah,
cut through the noise.
yeah, there's a lot out there now.
There is. And we've got some fascinating stuff to unpack today, really sparked by those recent congressional hearings, but also drawing on, well, decades of history.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is to trace that journey. How did we get from UAPs being dismissed, kept secret, to this current push for, well, more transparency?
It's quite a story.
It is. We'll be navigating through the history, some key research moments, and these big shifts we're seeing, using materials like the UAP Congressional Hearing transcript as a key reference point. It's this mix of national security, tech advancements, public interest.
Really compelling stuff. Okay, so let's go right into it. Where did the formal investigation of UAPs in the U.S. actually begin?
Well, the official start, you could say, goes back to the late 1940s. The U.S. Air Force kicked off a few projects.
Okay.
First Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and then the one most people have heard of, Project Blue Book. That one ran for quite a while, 1952 to 1969.
And what was the main goal there? Just figure out what they
But
did.
initially, the emphasis was heavily on debunking, trying to explain sightings away as, misidentified planes, weather balloons, natural stuff.
Right, the classic nothing to see here approach.
Pretty much. Although, interestingly, even back then, they looked into over 12,000 reports, and a significant chunk remained unexplained. That part often got downplayed, though.
Okay, so they weren't explaining everything away, but then the Cold War really heated up. That must have changed the game, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Big time. Suddenly, airspace security was everything. Any unidentified blip on the radar, anything flying around that you couldn't identify, potential threat, Soviet tech, maybe?
That makes sense.
So yeah, that led to a definite shift. Investigations became more rigorous, at least in some ways. They started pulling in radar data, pilot testimony, not just relying on, someone seeing something weird.
And the radar data, did that help clear things up?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes the radar returns showed things moving in ways that just, well, they didn't seem like solid objects or known weather patterns. That definitely made people scratch their heads.
And weren't there some specific, really high-profile incidents around then that caused a stir?
Yes, absolutely. There were several that really stood out and couldn't be easily dismissed. Think about the 1966 Westall sighting in Australia. Loads of students, teachers saw something land, take off.
Wow, okay.
Or the 1976 Tehran incident. That one's fascinating. Iranian fighter jets scrambled to intercept a UAP, reported electromagnetic interference. The object showed incredible speed and maneuverability.
Stuff that pilots said was impossible for their jets.
Exactly. Things like accelerating instantly, changing direction on a dime. These are the kinds of events that, yeah, they definitely grabbed the attention of military folks and certainly fueled public debate.
So Project Blue Book wraps up in '69. Did the official government interest just stop then?
Well, the formal, publicly acknowledged investigations definitely saw a decline. Through the 80s, the 90s, funding dried up, maybe political focus shifted elsewhere. Hard to say for sure.
But the topic didn't just die.
Oh, no, not at all. You had dedicated civilian groups, private researchers who just kept collecting reports, analyzing sightings. They built up a pretty big database of anecdotal evidence, kept the conversation alive, just, outside the official channels.
And I guess technology kept advancing during that time too, right? Did that play a role behind the scenes?
It really did, and that's an interesting angle. Advances in things like radar, infrared detection. They started making it harder to just brush off all sightings.
How so?
Well, you might have newer radar systems designed for fast jets, suddenly locking onto objects moving at, say, hypersonic speeds, but with no heat signature you'd expect from an engine.
Right, that doesn't compute with known physics.
Exactly. That kind of data, even if not widely publicized, would certainly make some people in the military and scientific communities think twice, maybe reevaluate things.
Okay, then fast forward to the 21st century. Around 2017, things really seemed to explode back into the mainstream with those Navy videos.
That was a watershed moment, no question. The Pentagon declassifying that footage, Navy pilots encountering these objects, the tic-tac, the gimbal things, moving in ways that just baffled them.
Yeah, I could hear it in their voices.
Right. It brought the issue roaring back. And crucially, it forced a kind of growing acknowledgement within government that, hey, maybe these things do pose a genuine national security threat.
What kind of threat specifically? Like foreign adversaries or something else?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? From a national security standpoint, the concern is, could this be advanced tech from China, Russia, someone else operating in our airspace with impunity? Is it some kind of unknown surveillance? That's the angle they have to take seriously.
Which leads directly to the UAP task force in 2020. That felt like a really official shift.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
Setting up the UAP task force within the Department of Defense, that signaled a major change in policy, a serious commitment to analyze sensor data, radar, infrared, signals intelligence, everything looking for patterns, trying to figure out what these things are.
And that brings us closer to today with the congressional hearings and this push for new laws about it all.
Exactly. It's all connected. The task force work, the data, the pilot reports fed into these hearings, leading to this emerging legislative effort focused on, transparency and accountability, getting clearer reporting channels, demanding access to records.
To get less secret.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Yes. Greater openness with the public, with the scientific community.
It's really interesting how public perception seems to be shifting too. It feels less fringe than it used to be.
Definitely. You look back, and media and pop culture have often treated UAPs with ridicule, sometimes alarm, but rarely just serious investigation. These hearings, though, they're helping shift it towards the mainstream. It's becoming okay to talk about it seriously.
Okay, so that's the broad sweep of history. Let's maybe zoom in on some of those really key moments, the milestones that have shaped where we are now with UAP research. Project Blue Book in '52, you mentioned it,
Yeah.
but that feels like a big early one.
It really was pivotal, yeah. Even if the main goal became debunking, just establishing it was a formal government acknowledgement that, okay, something is being cited and maybe it poses a national security question, its aim was to be systematic, at least on paper.
Then later on, maybe counterintuitively, the Freedom of Information Act became important. How did that work?
Yeah, FOIA, passed in '66, had an unexpected effect. As people started using it to request government files, previously classified UAP documents started trickling out.
Oh.
And this revealed not just interesting sighting details, but also patterns in how the government had handled the issue over the years. That access really fueled public curiosity and gave researchers, academics, more material to chew on, looking at the psychology, the sociology, the tech side of it.
Fascinating. Then we jump to 2020, the UAP task force. That feels like a modern turning point.
Huge, monumental shift, really. Establishing the task force within the DoD, that was recognition right from the top. That military encounters with UAPs needed proper, serious evaluation. It wasn't just anecdotes anymore. It was about hard sensor data and pilot reports demanding analysis. It underscored this need for transparency and a rigorous approach.
And then came that preliminary assessment report in June 2021, the one where they admitted a lot of sightings were unexplained.
Right, that was another major moment for the government to openly state, yes, we have numerous reports and we can't explain a significant number of them. That really changed the conversation nationally.
Gave it more legitimacy.
Absolutely. It helps move it out of the realm of conspiracy and into serious discussion, both within government and for the public.
Which leads into the 2022 congressional hearing itself. That seemed very public, very deliberate.
It really was a cornerstone event. You had lawmakers from both parties sitting down, seriously engaging with military and intelligence officials about UAPs.
In open session, some of it.
Exactly. That public engagement highlighted the national security dimension, yes, but it also addressed public concern. And crucially, it lent a real air of legitimacy to the whole field of UAP research. It wasn't just fringe groups anymore.
So looking forward now, what do you see as the next big steps? Where does UAP research go from here?
Well, I think the significance is only going to increase. We'll almost certainly see better detection or tech improved sensors, maybe AI analysis of data, probably more international collaboration because this is a global thing, and public perception will likely keep evolving, hopefully towards a more nuanced view, less automatic dismissal.
And maybe legal questions too. But disclosure.
Oh, definitely. The legal and regulatory side, how do you handle potential disclosures? How do you manage this data long term? Those questions are going to become really important.
Okay, so we've traced the history, hit the key milestones. Let's really dig into the shift you mentioned from secrecy to transparency. For decades, it felt like the official line was denial, or at least extreme skepticism.
That's a fair summary, yeah. Historically, the government's default posture was secrecy, often coupled with skepticism, maybe even ridicule sometimes. And that understandably created a lot of distrust among researchers, enthusiasts. People felt things were being hidden.
But these recent congressional hearings seem to be actively chipping away at that wall of secrecy.
They really do seem to be. It feels like a concerted effort, bipartisan too, to engage with this topic openly, systematically. It signals, I think, a real shift, a willingness to move towards transparency on UAP investigations.
And it's not just talk, right? There's actual legislation being discussed.
Exactly. We're seeing a new legislative framework starting to emerge directly from these hearings. The focus is squarely on transparency, pushing for clear, standard ways to report UAP encounters, analyze them rigorously, and share findings.
What does that mean for the people who've been tracking this for years? The enthusiasts, the researchers?
For them, it's huge. It offers a sense of validation, of legitimacy for their interest in their work, and it potentially provides a more structured way for them to contribute or access information. It legitimizes the whole field of study.
And outside of government and researchers, you mentioned the public attitude changing. It's less of a punchline now.
It does feel that way. You're seeing the topic move from the fringes into more mainstream discussion. News outlets cover it more seriously. The stigma around reporting a sighting or just being interested seems to be slowly diminishing. It's becoming a legitimate topic of public discourse.
What about the scientific community? Traditionally, maybe quite skeptical. Is it changing too?
That's another really interesting development. There seems to be a growing willingness among some scientists to engage, partly because there's the prospect of getting access to better, maybe even government-held data.
Right, actual data to analyze.
Exactly. Combine that with better sensors, better data analytics tools. There's a recognition that, hey, maybe there are genuinely anomalous phenomena here worth investigating. You're seeing more calls for serious, rigorous, maybe interdisciplinary studies.
And this isn't just happening in the U.S., is it? UAPs are reported worldwide.
Absolutely. It's a global phenomenon, which really underlines the need for collaboration across borders. If transparency is becoming the goal here, it makes sense for countries to potentially partner up, share data, share analysis.
So international partnerships could be next.
It seems logical,
Yeah.
aiming to understand these things together while still navigating, the obvious challenges, legal issues, protecting national security secrets, all that complex stuff.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, it seems pretty clear the whole UAP story has really shifted gears. We've gone from decades of dismissal, more or less, to serious government engagement.
Yeah, driven by that mix of things. National security worries, tech getting better, and the public just being more aware and maybe demanding answers.
And these recent congressional actions, this transparency push, they seem to be really speeding things up.
Definitely accelerating the evolution, I'd say. It's a move from secrecy towards engagement, fueled by those security needs, the tech, and a public that's paying attention.
And for you listening in, we really hope this discussion has given you a solid foundation, a way to understand this complex, fast-moving landscape without feeling totally overwhelmed by all the details out there.
And it leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder, doesn't it? Thinking about this increased transparency, the official acknowledgement that, yes, there are things we can't explain. What do you think the biggest implications are?
Yeah, what does it mean?
For how we see the universe, for global security, for where science goes next. What new questions does this whole shift raise for you personally?
Definitely a lot to think about there. And if your curiosity is sparked, keep following the news and the research. This story is far from over.
It's unfolding right now.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.